They've spent months campaigning, trying to convince South Africa's 27 million registered voters why they should be trusted to govern the country. Tonight, News24 has the country's top political leaders in the hot seat for the inaugural leaders debate, brought to you from the Atlantic Studios in Cape Town. The 29 May election is South Africa's most significant poll after the first democratic elections on 27 April 1994, 30 years ago. Will the ANC lose its majority? Will the opposition be able to form a united front against the ANC? How will they solve our largest problems: unemployment, crime, poverty and load shedding? 5 politicians battle it out on News24's stage in their last-ditch attempt to win over voters. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever News24 Leaders Debate. Good evening and welcome to the inaugural News24 Leaders Debate. My name is Adriaan Basson, Editor-in-Chief of News24, and I will be one of your moderators in this historic event.
I am Qaanitah Hunter, News24's Assistant Editor for Politics and Opinion, and I will moderate this debate alongside Adriaan. We are a few weeks away from what is dubbed the most important election in democratic South Africa since 1994. We invited 5 leaders of the biggest and most influential political parties in the country to debate some of the most contentious issues that will determine the outcome of this watershed poll.
The format of our debate is simple. Each candidate will have 1 minute and 30 seconds, that is 90 seconds, to answer a question. Candidates will also be given a 30 seconds opportunity for follow-up responses to each other. The moderators will keep the time and ensure that no candidate goes over the allocated time slots.
Participating in the debate today, I would like to welcome to the stage Mr. Songezo Zibi, leader of Rise Mzansi. Mr. Herman Mashaba, leader of ActionSA. Mr. John Steenhuisen, leader of the DA. Mr. Velenkosini Hlabisa, leader of the IFP. And finally, Mr. Khalid Sayed, a member of the Western Cape Legislature representing the ANC.
The country's third largest party, the EFF, was invited to this debate but chose not to participate. We also invited the president of the ANC, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, to participate, but the governing party chose to send a provincial representative. My first question is to all the candidates, starting with you, Mr. Steenhuisen from the DA. Unemployment and poverty remain South Africa's biggest challenge, with 32% of the adult population jobless, according to Stats SA. What will your party do to create millions of jobs over the next 5 years?
Well, thank you very much, Adriaan, and good evening to my fellow panelists and, of course, to the audience as well. Obviously, what we have to do is focus on creating an enabling environment to foster job creation. At the moment, we have a government in place that's policies, its approach are killing jobs. And it starts with getting the basic things right. You cannot grow an economy, create jobs, and attract investment into an economy if you don't have those basic things right. Things like water, sanitation, and of course, electricity. We're never going to industrialize South Africa to the level that we need to attract high labor-intensive manufacturing jobs where we can't even keep our current factories open. So we've got a laser-like focus in our manifesto on getting those basic things right. And our entire industrial policy is predicated on the industrial policy triangle, which says government must focus on getting the lower part of the triangle right before it starts trying to pick winners and losers like our government is doing with their industrial policy. Have to get infrastructure right, safety and security right. If you look at other economies in the world that are growing, there is an absolute focus on creating that infrastructure to make sure that businesses can get the goods and services they need into their factories, their raw materials. They're able to get their products to market on roads and rail networks that work, and that they're able to incentivize job creation by making sure that their businesses are growing and not contracting to the level that they are now.
Mr. Mashaba?
Well, thank you very much, Adriaan, and thank you to News24 for this invitation, and thank you to my fellow panelists. I think for us as ActionSA, we strongly believe the only way we can address the serious high unemployment, sustainable unemployment rate in the world, we've got to get the basics right. Firstly, we've got to deal with the question of safety of South Africans. I think if you look at the level of crime in this country, there's just no way that you can ever attract investment. So we've got to be tough on crime. Secondly, I think we need to really deal with what are called draconian labor legislation in our country. Our tripartite government over the last 30 years has really destroyed our manufacturing capability as a country. So we need to come out with reform as a matter of urgency to make it easy for entrepreneurs and SMMEs to create employment for our people. We've got to fight corruption. We need Chapter 9 institutions that can deal with a level of high corruption in an independent fashion without any political interference. We cannot allow a system where prosecution of corruption must be dealt through the president. We need an independent system that can ensure that South Africans can have confidence in our political environment. Once you create that, it will really assist in ensuring that we can create employment for our people. But more importantly, we've got to have controlled borders.
Mr. Zivi?
Thanks, Adriaan, and good morning, everyone. We have 3 percentage points GDP growth stuck between Transnet and Eskom. And each of those organizations need approximately 600 to 700 billion between them, money that the government doesn't have. And if we do not have a growing economy, we cannot produce the jobs that everybody is talking about. So the 2 areas of focus just to unlock the most serious impediments to the economy that are in our manifesto is how to fix Eskom and how to fix Transnet and how to make sure that we mobilize the capital that both institutions need. The second thing is to make sure that we recover and restore regional and local infrastructure and deal with dysfunctional municipalities. Every single business and every single home in South Africa is in a municipality. And the majority of those municipalities, unfortunately, are run by the ANC and are either near collapse or are collapsing. So we have proposed an intervention to put the most critical municipalities under administration so that you can begin to recover them and unlock the opportunity that exists at local level. And finally, we've got to describe the problem accurately. 90% of the unemployed either have matric or no matric at all. And that is why we have proposed training up to 1 million young people with or without matric in 5 years so that they can become employable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Said from the ANC.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me indicate that I'm also the ANC Western Cape provincial spokesperson in addition to serving in the Western Cape legislature. So I agree with the majority of my colleagues around the conditions in the country that need to be improved in order to enhance employment. But I want to indicate that within that context, 95% of South Africans now have access to water and electricity. So the conditions are improving. Labour legislation is not draconian in South Africa. Labour legislation ought to favour workers so that people do not lose their jobs and get frustrated out of work, and they can have quality employment. So it's not just merely addressing unemployment, it's ensuring that we've got quality jobs for our people. We've tripled the size of the South African economy since 1994. The ANC recognizes the critical importance of job creation, particularly for young people. And this is why, and I'm a product of the ANC Youth League, we've pushed forward a policy that the 5-year experience required for entry-level jobs in the public sector is done away with. So that's very, very important. We've had various successful programs for work placement. EPWP programs have been a great success. It has created millions of work opportunities. Moving forward, our focus is on bolstering small and medium enterprises by simplifying regulatory processes and also focus on renewable energy as well. Thank you very much.
Mr. Said. Mr. Hlabisa.
Thank you very much, Adriaan, the viewers and all participants in this interview. The IFP believes in a free market economy which has an ability of increasing and developing our economy in order to create the opportunities for more investors to invest in our country. We believe that in order to create more job opportunities, create an enabling environment. Load shedding is affecting our economy, which impacts on the job opportunities. Fix load shedding, fix crime. No investor will have an interest in investing in a country which is a crime zone. The IFP believes that you must concentrate in the industrialization to create more opportunities for work. Cut down the bloated cabinet. There are ministers we don't need in South Africa. There are deputy ministers we don't need. Yes, there are few ministries which are big enough to have deputy ministries. You can save a lot of money which is spent unnecessarily in a bloated cabinet. The IFP believes concentrate in the local economic development, concentrate on SMEs in order to boost the opportunities for jobs in our country.
Mr. Steenhuisen, you wanted to respond to Mr. Syed from the ANC.
Yeah, I wanted to say that it's, water is absolutely essential, and I think it's incorrect to say that 95% of people don't have access to water. We woke up to the News24 article this morning that Johannesburg is about to go into a major crisis, precisely because that failing municipality, which is run in a coalition between the ANC and the EFF and a few of their fellow travellers, has not invested in infrastructure. And this is precisely why I come back to the point why infrastructure is so important, and why the city of Cape Town, for instance, is investing over 32 billion rand this year in infrastructure, which is larger than Johannesburg and Durban's infrastructure budget alone. You need to be able to invest in infrastructure, and it needs to be purposeful investment that focuses on getting those basic things like water right. No industrial process can happen with water.
Mr. Syed, do you want to respond to that?
Thank you very much. Mr. Steenhuisen needs to point out why the 95% figure is not correct with facts. We've got facts. But number two, we are in the city of Cape Town currently. Life in the city of Cape Town, the reality on the ground. We are on the ground. The reality on the ground paints a completely different picture.
Mr. Syed,
if you go to Qaanitah, if you go to Manenberg, if you go to Heideveld, you'll find a completely different picture in that regard. Sanitation, people are forced to live in the most undignified living conditions in the city of Cape Town under the Democratic Alliance.
Mr. Syed, we'll stay with you for the next question. The ANC has been in power for 30 years, yet the party has failed to meaningfully grow the economy, has failed to establish new industries, and to lift millions of people from poverty. Why should the ANC be trusted for a 7th time by the electorate to govern?
As I've indicated in my introductory remarks, it is untrue. The ANC has not failed to grow the economy. We've made mistakes, like any political party. We were a party in existence for 112 years. We've been in government since 1994. There have been global recessions. There's been COVID-19, but we've tripled the size of the South African economy. We've made significant reforms in the financial management and in labor laws to create more stable and an inviting investment environment. VW has just now, an announcement has been made, in fact it's been covered in News24, have just invested, massive investment, innovation. And we, as I've indicated earlier, we are involved in diversifying our energy sources as well, promoting innovation through research, agriculture. So the ANC has a proven track record of ensuring stable economic growth, notwithstanding the conditions that we face and notwithstanding a political discourse that is being promoted, which tries to give an impression to investors that the country is unstable, an antagonistic political discourse. We have still presided over a stable democracy, and that is what investors want to see.
Mr. Mashaba, is the country stable or not?
Very far from being stable. Actually, I just wanted to respond to Mr. Syed regarding the ANC failure to grow our economy. In actual fact, that they've managed to successfully, over the last 30 years, destroy our economy, destroy jobs. You know, we're the only country in the world where we have billions of industrial areas lying empty, dormant today. But Harangwa industrial area, where I started my business in 1985, Babelech industrial area, and all over. These factories were closed one after the other by the Tripartite Alliance. That's why I'm saying they have got draconian labor laws that have actually destroyed the manufacturing base of our country.
Mr. Zibi, you want to weigh in?
Yes, I think the question, Qaanitah, to the ANC should be why the country should retain the biggest criminal syndicate it has ever seen that operates in public, that has corrupted not just our government, but the very moral fiber of our society. People's lives are worse now than they were 15 years ago. Unemployment is higher today than it was 15 years ago. The murder rate is worse now than it was 15 years ago. Access to water and all of the basic things are worse now than they were 15 years ago. They cannot be retained. They've got to go because South Africa needs new leaders with a better vision and with better capabilities than what we have to deal with now.
Mr. Tlhabisa?
You can only tell a child that ANC has not failed our country. Even a person who is not a South African knows that South Africa is going down the drain because of the failures of the ruling party. Our economy has been broken down. The rate of unemployment has increased. You have graduates from medical doctors of all kinds, something we never thought will happen during our lifetime in a free country, who are unemployed. Load shedding, corruption is worse under the watch of the ANC.
Sure.
Mr. Sinazin, the next question is for you.
I wanted to weigh in on that one.
Yeah, you wanted. 30 seconds.
I wanted to say, I agree completely with Mr. Sayed. They have diversified energy in South Africa. We've been diversified into candles and paraffin lamps because they've failed to keep the electricity on. And I think that it is fundamentally dishonest and manipulative of the ANC to come here and pretend like they are solving the energy crisis when all that they're actually doing is manipulating us to believe that load shedding is past, when we know they've got plans for stage 16 after the 30th of May. This is the ultimate manipulation that you're seeing, pretending load shedding is gone when they know it's coming back. They're burning diesel and a huge amount of it.
Mr. Sena, I want to turn to the DA's own manifesto. So I read it, and your party will scrap black economic empowerment and employment equity because, according to the DA, it has only enriched a political elite. Yet the black middle class has grown to about 3.5 million people, according to UCT's Liberty Institute, surpassing the number of white South Africans in the middle class. Won't your policies regress the growth in the black middle class?
Not at all. In fact, they will stimulate growth amongst that middle class because our approach moves away from the trickle-down BEE approach that has created a very wealthy layer of individuals, but underneath that you have 30 million South Africans, 99.97% of whom are black, who live below the poverty line of the country. It's not sustainable to have so many people living in poverty in a country. What our policy looks at doing is cutting out the BE fat cats, and we've seen them, the Mr. Edwin Sodis and others who fund Mr. Mashatile's lifestyle and manipulate us into thinking that they're having something that's broad-based and empowering, when all it's doing is re-empowering the same elite. We focus on the opportunity side of the economy, the real things that deal with inequality. The ANC maybe started out on the right track and trying to address a problem, but black South African households now are 10% poorer than they were at the beginning of BEE. Black unemployment has grown exponentially under these policies. Let's focus on the opportunity things, a decent education, making sure people live in a safe community, making sure people have access to the basic services that they need, making sure that people have genuine access to university without having their NSFAS funds stolen. That's how you address inequality in South Africa, and that's how you have a broad-based system. So let's reward companies in South Africa that put and invest money in the opportunity side of the economy that's really going to lift people out of poverty into opportunity and create a society where we can eventually move forward together.
Mr. Syed, your party, the ANC, wants to continue with BE and employment equity, right?
Most certainly. We want to continue with BE and employment equity. We think BE works. We do admit to some of the shortcomings around the implementation, and where certain individuals have taken advantage. We agree with Mr. Steenhuisen in that regard, but you cannot throw out the entire principle and concept of BE. We do need to address issues around education, service delivery, crime. That's important, but that does not mean that BEE ought to be thrown away, because BEE has proven that we've been able to empower black people in this country beyond just the elite. In fact, here in the Western Cape, where you've got a provincial government that radically opposes BEE, you can see what it has done to the Western Cape economy. You can see what it has done to the township economy. They've crippled the township economy.
Thank you. I want to give Mr. Zibi an opportunity to weigh in, then come to Mr. Glabisa.
Given how much people's lives have regressed over the last 15 or 20 years, the ANC cannot be trusted with empowering the lives of black people in this country. But having said that, this does not mean we must not perform that task, because it is really important. I happen to have the benefit of being a senior corporate executive. Women get paid less for doing the same work that men do in the corporate sector. They've got less chance of being promoted than men in the corporate sector. True with black, African, colored, and Indian males. You can't manage what you do not measure. We have to set targets, we have to manage effectively, and finally, there is a difference between corruption and cronyism and empowering people.
In short, do you want to keep BEE in place?
We want to keep black economic empowerment, but the ANC cannot be trusted with it.
Thank you. Mr. Glabisa?
For records, the IFP believes BEE should be kept, but a close watch should be done, because under the ruling party, it was manipulated for friends, relatives, politically connected people. We believe the previously disadvantaged people should be given a special focus in order to address the inequalities that happened in the past, but this must be closely watched so that it doesn't benefit a certain group at the expense of others.
And Mr. Mashaba?
Well, I think for us as ActionSA, we strongly believe Triple B of 2003 must be abolished and be buried in an unmarked grave. However, we believe in the empowerment of black people. It is for that reason we've just come out of our policy conference where we approved what we call inclusive economic empowerment, where we are saying to businesses, you are going to contribute 5% of your profits to an opportunity fund that is going to address the ills of the apartheid, the ills of the ANC's government, where we can invest in black communities to ensure that we can also really bring them up like other communities.
Mr. Steiner, I wanted to wrap on this issue for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that to Mr. Said, he's used the Western Cape, and I forgive him because he is a provincial MPL, that's his view. But I'm very glad he raised the DA's record here, because that's precisely why the economy is growing here. It's precisely why, over the last year, 368,000 new jobs were created in the DA-run Western Cape. It's why it's the only provincial economy that's actually growing to absorb work seekers in this particular country, because our policies work, unlike his, which fail.
My next question is to all the candidates, starting with Mr. Mashaba from ActionSA. Now, universal healthcare is regarded as a positive step towards achieving equality in basic healthcare, which is a human right. Why does the country need or not need the National Health Insurance Scheme that is currently sitting on the President's desk and will probably be signed into law?
Well, I think we really hope as ActionSA that the President should not really sign that piece of legislation, because it'll really give the ANC thuggery to really continue looting state resources. I think what we need is to really invest in our public healthcare systems, where we've declared as ActionSA in terms of our healthcare policies. Let's invest in clinics, hospitals throughout the country, train our own local doctors, working with the universities and current hospitals. What we are saying is that for us as ActionSA, we've taken a decision during our policy conference that Not a single as government or employee will be subsidized on private healthcare. If you want private healthcare, you've privatized yourself. The president of the country, the minister of health will go to Baragwanath Hospital in the event of them actually needing medical intervention. In that way, you will see how quickly we can actually reverse the destruction of our healthcare by the ANC over the last 30 years. Because there's absolutely nothing wrong with us as a public driving our healthcare to work for everyone, but at the same time allow the private sector to operate, and those who can afford, let them go to the private hospitals. But public institutions and officials will not actually go to the private hospitals. If they want to go to private hospitals, then let them pay that out of their own pockets.
Mr. Syed, NHI?
So, similar to your question relating to broad-based economic empowerment, it's about addressing the legacy of apartheid. And clearly our colleagues, particularly those who are part of the Moon Pact, have got no interest in addressing the material conditions of apartheid. The national health insurance is a crucial step, in our view, to achieving universal health coverage. Now, since its proposal, we have worked as the ANC tirelessly to lay a strong foundation for the implementation, so people do not need to worry. We have piloted the NHI, in fact, in several districts. Here in the Western Cape, in Knysna, medical staff told us, I visited that particular hospital, they indicated the major difference that the NHI pilot project has made to their working conditions, and they're serving poor communities of Knysna. Now, going forward, we are committed to expanding the initiative. We do understand that, that there are criticisms, and valid criticisms as well, and we're aware of those particular complexities, but we're also aware of the success of this particular program in various other countries of the world. So we will learn from where there have been mistakes made in the implementation of programs such as these, but also we'll build on some of the successes. So we are not closed to say that it's going to be perfect.
Mr. Zibi, do we need NHI?
We need to get out of the framing, the ANC framing of how to understand our problems, because they create these diversions, which enable them to pretend that they're coming up with a solution when they're not coming up with a solution really. The question that we should be asking ourselves is, how do we ensure that every single South African in all four corners of this country has got access to good healthcare facilities and medical staff and medication for 90 to 95% of their needs, and also have access to specialist care for what they need. I come from the Eastern Cape. The nearest hospital from where my mother and myself have a home in Mqanduli is 35 kilometers away in Zitulele Hospital. It takes up to 1.5 hours to get there because the road is so bad. And the referral hospital is 100 kilometers in the other direction. The NHI is not going to get you out of that problem. Secondly, the Eastern Cape has no more than 5 urologists in total. 5. If we cannot solve that problem, the NHI is not going to make sure that we've got more specialists than we actually have in the country. And finally, between medical legal claims and the corruption in the health department of the Eastern Cape, there's a 4.5 billion rand deficit that department starts with. That is a result of mismanagement, it's a result of corruption, it's a result of healthcare workers whose working conditions are so horrendous that you begin to see the kind of claims that the government is having to pay. This is a problem of corruption and bad government and bad leaders, not whether we've got insurance or not. And we can solve that problem by getting the basics of government right.
Mr. Labisa, where does your party stand on NHI?
The IFP believes in the universal health care access for every South African. But the current NHI in its form is a recipe for disaster. The IFP warned the ANC even when they introduced outcome-based education, which later they had to drop, having destroyed the future of our youth. NHI in its current form has no budget. Why do you go for something that will cost billions of rand and you don't have money to fund that progress? What you note, medical practitioners and every stakeholder involved on health issues is against the NHI as it stands, because the government is known of being a failure to pay the service provider. Which medical person can render services to patients and be paid 6 months down the line. No one. The NHI is going to destroy the health system, the IFP believes. Why don't we employ doctors, more nurses, concentrate on the infrastructure, upgrade the status of our hospitals, then talking of a dream which you cannot fund because you are playing with the feelings of the people behaving as if you think you feel better for them, yet you know you won't deliver what you are saying.
Mr. Steenhuisen, NHI being a dream the ANC can't fund?
Well, I don't think it's a dream. I think it's a nightmare. And if you look at what NHI is, it's going to be Eskom for the healthcare industry, because that's essentially what you're going to do. And we saw how well Eskom's is operating. I believe fundamentally that every South African needs to have their constitutional right to access to healthcare realized. But it's not going to happen through the NHI. And again, it's a case of the ANC trying to run before they can walk. The reality is, having traveled around South Africa and sat with cancer patients whose only lifeline is a state hospital, who have had their oncology treatments delayed time and time again because the oncology machines are broken, there's a shortage of the doctors that are required, they don't have access to the medication that is required. These are the basic things. Things like basic health care, making sure that people's primary health care needs are met, are not even being achieved. Now you're going to try and layer a very complicated and expensive system over a failing basic system. It is a recipe for disaster, which is why we've put forward a credible costed plan for ensuring that every South African will have access to universal health care. And it focuses on introducing a social reinsurance scheme. It focuses on being able to introduce a risk equalization strategy to be able to fund and improve the public health care system. We're not going to solve the problem by giving the ANC now another blank check to manipulate the healthcare system in the way in which they've manipulated our energy system, the way they've manipulated every state and entity they've been given authority over.
Thank you, Mr. Steenhuisen. My next question is also to all our candidates, starting with you, Mr. Zibi. Crime remains a massive scourge in our society. The murder rate, possibly the most reliable documented crime statistic, is back to levels of 30 years ago. Successive police commissioners have been fired or convicted of crime. The ANC government has now appointed a few thousand extra police officers. Will this solve our crime problem?
No, it won't. Because the underlying drivers of crime are socio-economic in nature. The majority of murders, about 74% of murders and attempted murders, are between people who know one another. They either happen in the home or they happen in social settings, in and around taverns and other places of entertainment. With our levels of youth unemployment and the level of substance abuse that we have, this problem is set to continue. That is why in our manifesto, we have proposed looking at a range of policy interventions that cover social policy as well as crime prevention, especially the smart use of data to determine where the in-moment and post-crime interventions should be made. But we cannot forget that what we need to do is to make sure that the majority of our young people get out of what is called the NEET category in the unemployment stats, not in employment, education, or training, that we've got proper facilities in our communities where young people can engage in arts and sports and so on, and also where we improve the economy to the point where it is more profitable. It is more likely for somebody to be engaged in productive economic activity than being involved in crime. I agree that we need to fire the top brass of the security cluster because they themselves are corrupt and are behind a lot of the crime that we have in South Africa. But you cannot ignore the underlying drivers of crime and violence in our society.
Mr. Said?
No, thank you very much. I think it's important that we do ensure that there's more boots on the ground. That is important. I mean, just now we've returned from one of the areas in Cape Town, Hanover Park, where a mobile police station was established. There's more boots on the ground. That's important. But the ANC approach is to involve communities in crime fighting. Ensure that community policing forums are empowered. They are given much more support. And that's important. Communities need to also be the eyes and ears of police. We also need to get to a point, and yes, we do admit that there has been corruption at the level of police. And those cases are being dealt with, but also proof must be given when we speak broadly about police being corrupt, because the level of trust between citizens and our men and women in blue needs to be strengthened. Yes, and we understand police must do things properly, but also on our side as politicians, we must be responsible in how we speak about the men and women who are out there working with residents and fighting criminals. So that's very, very important. But we agree, underlying factors, underlying issues affecting young people in communities need to be addressed in order to tackle crime head on. And we have started doing that as the ANC, and we will speed that up when we return to power on the 29th of May, after the 29th of May.
Mr. Hlabisa, will more police boots on the ground solve our crime problem?
Definitely. If you want to deal with crime, firstly, you must be tough on crime and criminals. You shouldn't put more emphasis on the community who are not armed to deal with criminals who are fully armed. The IFP believes you need to build more police stations, and in all hotspots of crime, if you can't provide a police station, provide a 24/7 mobile station, employ more policemen and women. There is enough money in our country, as I said, cut down the bloated cabinet as a first priority. Ensure that the police are well equipped. More vehicles be provided, and each and every police station should be taken out of the load shedding, because at night, when people is doing load shedding, when they run to the police station, police say, we can't help you. You can't even come inside because it is dark. The IFP believes if you want to deal with crime, you must sharpen the skills of police so that when they take statements, those statements stand in the court of law. You must also deal with the prosecution section so that when they prosecute cases, they deal with cases thoroughly. In terms of judiciary, provide more courts that will deal with specialized cases. Don't have a case running for 10 years, witness disappear, and the case end up not being there.
Thank you, Mr. Steenhuisen.
Well, I think it's a fallacy to blame young, unemployed South Africans for the crime problem in South Africa. That's not the case. But the reality is we have a policing problem in South Africa, and the model in which we police is not suitable to actually tackle crime. And that's why one of the key manifesto pledges that we've made is a decentralization of policing to a local and provincial level. This is international best practice. It's how policing is done around the world. The reality is that we lack consequences because we do not detect crime, and that there are no consequences for those who commit crime. And it's reflected in our conviction rate in South Africa, which is incredibly low. We believe, and I'm very glad that Hanover Park has been mentioned, that the way to do that is by devolving policing down to competent local and provincial government. We've seen through the Western Cape's law enforcement enhancement program that even though policing is not a provincial and local function at the moment, we've put resources into it because we can't keep people at the mercy of criminals while the national government fails to address the shocking police to population ratio in stations like Gugulethu and in Inyanga and Khayelitsha. And that's why we put those resources on. The result, 27,000 arrests of criminals in the last year alone through the law enforcement advancement program. We also need to fundamentally understand that the policing challenges in each province are very different to each other, and trying to take the square peg of a national policing plan and hammer it into a round hole in a particular province is never going to get to grips with crime.
Thank you, Mr. Mashaba.
Well, I think, the question of crime in South Africa, it actually has to really be solved by the South African people themselves, by not allowing themselves to be governed by criminal enterprise. I think they need to, on the 29th of May, remove this criminal enterprise that's actually running our country, because for as long as we have such leadership running our criminal justice system, we can only get the kind of consequences that we have where we now the murder capital of the world. So we need to put in ethical leadership, and that is, as I said, this problem can be solved by, it's going to be solved by South African voters on the 29th of May. But at the same time, what we need, as I said earlier on, we need specialized units, independent criminal justice system that can be able to independently be able to deal with cases without any fear or favor. But also, very importantly, I think we need to really be brutal with criminals. I think this parole system, it's totally unacceptable when repeat offenders in this country are getting away with murder. So we, as ActionSA, we strongly believe once you're convicted, you're sentenced to life imprisonment, like Thabo Beste, this murderer, rapist. Thabo Beste must die in jail, must never see the light of day out of prison any longer. So, and they've got to pay back to society. Prison cannot really be a hotel. These prisoners must go out and actually work to pay back to society. They can never have free accommodation and free meals at the expense of law-abiding citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Mshoma. Mr. Zibi, you wanted 30 seconds to respond?
Yes, I do. I think if anybody here believes that socio-economic conditions have nothing to do with the levels of violent crime, then you need to look at the scariest places in this city that we are in and who lives there and what the conditions are. Those conditions are the same in Alex, they're the same in the city of Durban, they're the same in Buffalo City, and so on. There is a correlation between violent crime and extreme inequality, neglect, and poverty. And we have two governing parties in this debate. It's the African National Congress and the DA. And none of them can escape accountability for the state in which those violent and unsafe communities are.
Mr. Steenhuisen, you wanted to respond?
I want to just point out that Mr. Zibi must maybe read the Constitution and decide who's actually responsible for policing in the country. It's a national function. But I'm very glad to say that it is precisely for that reason that this city and this province are focusing on dealing with the drivers of inequality, creating jobs, providing access to housing and the like. Those are the things that are going to move the needle in dealing with inequality. But I say it as a fallacy to blame poor, unemployed, and let's be honest, black South Africans for the crime problem in South Africa. If that was the case and poverty was the only driver, then India would be one of the most dangerous places in the world. It's not. We've got to focus on fixing our policing system to ensure there are consequences for those who commit crime.
Let's turn to governance for a moment now, and I want to start with Mr. Tlhabisa. The IFP is in government in various municipalities across KwaZulu-Natal. In the Abaqalusi municipality, the wife of an ousted mayor allegedly lied about work experiences to get a managerial position. We got a transcript of your deployment committee where it is conceded that she has less than the 5 years of work experience there. In an IFP government, what is the role of cadre deployment? And how does the IFP weigh experience over cadre deployment in actual governance?
The IFP believes, firstly, in consequence management as a major factor. I want to start with the example you are referring to. The person was not employed by the IFP, it was employed by the administration of the municipality. When the matter was raised in the media, we followed it up, and she is no longer working in that municipality because we said you can't keep her because you employed her against the advertisement. We believe that cadre deployment destroyed the professionalism in the governance of our country from local, provincial, and national level. We believe people must be employed on the basis of competency, even both on the deployment of political office bearers. People must not be deployed because they were good in toy-toying or in empty argument. People must be deployed on the basis of competency, and you must deploy relevant people on relevant jobs. If you want to deal with crime, deploy someone who has a better information in terms of how to deal with crime, as well as competent in that area, as similar as in other cases. And in terms of governance, in order to have a fully functional government, you must have consequence management in place, devolve power from national to provincial and down to local level, and you will have efficient government.
Mr. Zibi, you want to weigh in on the issue of cadre deployment?
Yeah, I wanted to say, there are some very clear limits. It's not complicated. Political appointees must remain in the ministerial office and nowhere else. we need to get into the habit of professionalizing the public service. From municipal manager on down, or director general, those must be competent professionals appointed because they can do the job. Let us start reframing our understanding of even the concept of deployment, because it is dangerous in and of itself.
Mr. Syed, your party has been hauled over the coals for the issue of cadre deployment. What do you have to say?
I think, again, we want to admit that there have been mistakes in terms of implementation. But the principle of cadre deployment remains important. A government, and in any part of the world, even here, you cannot implement the policies of government, particularly based on the manifesto and promises, like promises we are making now to the electorate, if you do not have the most competent people in the public service, but also at senior levels who understand who have a critical understanding of the politics behind the policies. And people must not be very, very quick to dismiss cadre deployment when they are implementing it wrongfully, to actually undermine BEE, to actually undermine women where they do govern.
Mr. Steenhuisen, I'll get you, Mr. Mashaba. Mr. Steenhuisen, you shaking your head.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think it's absurd what's just been said. But let me just say this. Cadre deployment is the root of the problem about why we have state capture in the country. You would not have been able to capture the state if you didn't do cadre deployment. And let's just be honest. We're not talking about well-qualified people. We're talking about people who've been assessed on nothing other than their loyalty to the party. And I've seen, when we got the cadre deployment minutes, because we've been fighting cadre deployment for so long, the Excel spreadsheet that doesn't mark their experience or their ability, it marks their years of loyalty to the party. And that's what's being deployed, and that's why we're failing to have a proper public service. We need to end cadre deployment, which is why we've got a bill before Parliament that we will pass.
Mr. Mashaba?
Well, I think, honestly, one doesn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that if you employ people for the wrong reasons, you're going to get the wrong outcome, honestly. You know, I've had an opportunity to be in the private sector for now close to 40 years. I've had an opportunity to be the mayor of the city of Johannesburg for 3 years. In the 3 years as the mayor, managed to fire out 4 of my own MMCs, 3 from my own party. For corruption. So it is not just really a question of cadre deployment, it's a question of competence. If you're going to employ people for wrong reasons, unfortunately you're going to get the wrong outcomes.
Mr. Zibi, the next question is to you. You recently made headlines when the DA warned voters that you were in favor of land expropriation. Can you please explain to News24's viewers exactly what Rise Mzansi's position is on expropriation without compensation, and how land reform should be managed to protect food security?
Thanks, Adriaan. Let me start with the second. How should land justice and spatial justice happen? We think that over the last 30 years, our government has ignored land justice and done nearly no spatial planning at all. There are 3 characteristics of the problem. The first is that you've got a historical land injustice. The second is that the population has grown. And thirdly, the South African population is urbanizing. And yet we act surprised each time there are so-called informal settlements or unlawful settlements where we've converted South Africans into unlawful occupiers of land in their own country. One of the solutions that is available to any government under our constitution is expropriation of land. Our constitution says that expropriation can happen with appropriate compensation to the owners of that land. I am not certain what the drama is about. What we have said is that this is one of the options that is available. And the first thing that needs to happen is to do a land audit to see who owns what land and where, because even the government itself does not know what land it owns in which area. And therefore, we need to do the land audit, do proper spatial planning for the long term, and then decide where and when expropriation is going to be needed. If expropriation needs to happen, and where it happens in terms of our constitution, where there's appropriate compensation. End of story. Anything else is misinformation and disinformation.
Mr. Steenhuisen, why do you believe you had to warn voters about Rise Mzansi's expropriation?
Because I don't think that we're getting a straightforward answer here. The premier candidate of this party in the Western Cape is in favor of land expropriation, He's also in favor of land occupation, and he's himself has led many of these occupations, and his Twitter feed is a various litany of these things. The reality is, as Mr. Zibi said, expropriation can take place in terms of the law. Maybe he's not aware that the national government have just passed a bill called the Land Expropriation Bill that provides for nil compensation. So is he saying to us today that if it's done in terms of that law, then it's all right, that we can expropriate land without compensation?
I think we need to ask for a response to that.
Yes, I'm sure John can read. Certainly, I hope so. Because the same Section 25 of our Constitution sets out some caveats that are supposed to guide how much compensation needs to be. Theoretically, it is possible for nil compensation to be provided if all the caveats set out under Section 25 are met in the context of that specific property. The Western Cape government is in a court fight with Shoprite right now over the expropriation of a piece of land in order to build a road. And Alan Winde and this government are fighting Shoprite. What the hell is going on here?
Sorry.
John?
With respect, that's nowhere does it say without compensation. Mr. Zibi needs to say very clearly to us today, does he support government's bill that provides for expropriation with nil compensation, given the fact that property rights and the right to property is one of the bedrocks of a functioning, effective economy? Now, no one is suggesting that we don't have a land justice problem in South Africa, but you don't solve that problem by diminishing the rights of other people and allowing a government to arbitrarily take land away from people with no compensation.
Mr. Zibi, I want to come back to you because Mr. Steenhuisen says you are not explicitly clear on this issue of without compensation. But Mr. Syed, you want to come in on this?
Yes, no, I most certainly want to come in. I know, and Mr. Steenhuisen raised the point around the premier candidate of Rise Mzansi speaking about land invasions. This shows the detachment that the Democratic Alliance has from the realities facing our people on the ground. Yes. The Western Cape has got over 800,000 informal settlements. Over 800. In fact, they go and they take communities to court. They waste taxpayers' money on opposing public government-owned land to be used for integrated human settlements, to block that. So ours is to say, integrated human settlement development closer to the CBD, but on land reform and the question around
Mr.
food
Syed,
security, we want to provide support to new farmers through access to land, financial resources, and training, and in various modern farming techniques. So it's to say that yes, land redistribution, but to be done in a manner that does not disrupt farming in our country and food security.
The IFP believes in the expropriation with compensation. There is no one who can invest in a country where there is no security in terms of the land in which you invest. We believe as the IFP, the first thing that must be done, there is land under the control of the government. You do not have to compensate anyone, do an audit of that land, distribute it to the previously disadvantaged people, because no one is going to compensate, and where you need more land, acquire it, compensate accordingly.
I think one thing that South Africans must know and accept is the fact that you cannot really grow an economy and have prosperity in an environment of chaos. I think we've just really witnessed what has happened in Zimbabwe. And South Africa can ill afford to really make the same kind of mistakes like Zimbabwe. Section 25 of our Constitution does allow expropriation, and I'll use my example as the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. When I was the mayor in the 3 years, I had the inner city rejuvenation plan where we expropriated the property without compensation, as long as you do it for public good.
Let's wrap up this discussion on land, Mr. Zibi.
Now, I'm afraid not only does John not read properly, also doesn't listen properly. Because I have just explained here what Rise Mzansi's position is. He needs to make a difference between ourselves and the ANC, which the Democratic Alliance continues to conflate. But for his benefit, because I think the viewers got the message, we have said that this Constitution, Section 25 of the Constitution, provides for expropriation and sets out a set of subsections where the compensation is determined. And I said, theoretically, depending on the specific context, it could be nil, but that needs to be determined within the law. End of story.
Let's move on now.
Sorry, I need to come in there. Sorry, with the greatest of respect. I mean, he got 2 bites.
Very quickly,
Jerry,
Mrs.
I only got
Tianese.
1. To say to you very clearly, the law has just been passed. It says nil compensation, and it says that government would have to do it, and that people would have to go to court to oppose that. So what this is a complete diluting of the property rights of people in South Africa. And with respect, I can read and I can write, and I can assure you very clearly that I have seen the bill because it came through Parliament, and it's why we opposed it. Mr. Zibi is saying, well, it can happen in terms of the law. That's the law that we're going to get. Mr. Sayed's party is going to decide when your land gets taken and whether they pay for it or not. And I don't think that's a situation.
Because
we have to move on, candidates. We have to move on to the next topic, and that is the ongoing power outages as well as interruption to water supply that's decimating the economy, and it's a major source of frustration for the public. I want each candidate to come up with just top 2 things, just 2 things on how you would immediately stop load shedding and the interruption to water supply if you were elected the government. Mr. Sayed, you are the government in 8 out of 9 provinces. You go first.
In terms of dealing with the issue of load shedding, we're already on track. We're moving forward. Renewable energy is one of the options, and we also basically maintain the mode of electricity supply which we have now. That's important, and to ensure that we run Eskom in a very, very clear and efficient manner. With regards to water supply, there you've got to deal with how does national government, provincial government, and local government work much more closely together. So the district development model is an important one, which we have put in place, and we want to move forward with that. I think so that there's a conversation, that there's monitoring, and there's implementation. When a problem happens relating to water supply, it must not be that I've complained to my local councillor, it goes to council, nothing happens. Each and every sphere of government needs to work closely together to resolve it as and when it happens.
Mr. Tlhabisa?
Let us start with load shedding because it does affect the water supply. The IFP believes that the first thing that you need to do is maintenance. If you do not maintain the infrastructure at Eskom, definitely it's going to fail you along the road. Secondly, the IFP believes we must build more power stations. When you commission a power station that you will build it over 2 years, finish it in 2 years, it mustn't be money that gets finished yet the project is not finished over a period of 10 years. We believe also you must cut down the red tape in procurement. There is a long process. If you want to procure a party, for instance, in Germany or in Japan, cut down the red tape, have a direct access so that you cut off the long waiting period to get the part that you want from somewhere. In terms of the water supply, the IFP believes there should be more devolution of power from national to local government sphere. More money should go to the local government because that is where the actual work takes place. Deal with the infrastructure, the maintenance of pipes must be done. Those that have stayed there for quite a long time, to avoid unnecessary leakages, replace them, and you must ensure that the maintenance is done. Employ relevant people in terms of the understanding and knowledge of water so that you don't experience cutting and shortages.
Mr. Stian,
yeah, thank you very much. I think that the solutions are very clear. First of all, we have to break the state-owned monopoly on energy generation, distribution, supply in the country, and allow private sector players into the market, independent power producers, and unleash a greenfield new industry in South Africa. The second thing you need to do is what we're already doing where we're in government, is creating prosumers, which means you incentivizing people to put rooftop solar in, and they are able to feed that back into the system, and they pay a tariff to do that. That increases supply, will bring the cost down, and will then mean there's more to be provided for poorer consumers. When it comes to water, I think one of the big problems is the infrastructure backlog. So let's look at a place like Johannesburg. It's not that there's no water. The dams are full. There's plenty of rainfall there. It's not a drought. It's the infrastructure, the piped infrastructure that has failed there. I think that when national government is going to have to step in, because those municipalities do not have the billions that are going to be required to fix that infrastructure, I think you're going to have to, A, allow private sector investment to come in there, but secondly, government giving national water grants to municipalities, but strictly ring-fenced. So you can't then take the money that should have been spent on replacing asbestos concrete pipes, rebuilding reservoirs, improving dams, and then spend it on tracksuits for the Selga conference or any of these other ways in which municipalities waste money, and spend it on infrastructure, make sure it is ring-fenced specifically for water infrastructure so that we can get water into our people's homes.
Mr. Mashaba, your
Well,
part?
I think the shortage of water and electricity in this country is a man-made problem by the ANC through the many years of corruption, and it's actually something that I used to share with the residents of the city of Johannesburg when I was a mayor, because when I got in, they discovered 170 billion rands of infrastructure backlog. I don't know whether the ANC did not know or they forgot that there's maintenance and upgrade of infrastructure. You cannot let society grow at this rate, but at the same time, you allow the infrastructure built by the party system to service everyone else. So we need to firstly, I think, ask people of South Africa, please, 29th of May, let's remove the ANC government, put in a professional government, ethical government that can also focus on investing in our infrastructure in terms of Eskom and so forth. Eskom has to operate on a professional basis and allow private sector investors also to compete with it. If Eskom cannot compete with the private sector, then let it die a natural death. As long as at the end of the day, people of South Africa get electricity and they get it at the cheapest possible price and being offered by people with vested interest, not us as government all the time actually feeding something that you can never one day actually find a solution to it.
Mr. Zibi?
The first thing is that we need to be honest with the South African people. There is no immediate solution to any of these problems. The damage caused by the ANC over the last 20 years through neglect and corruption is just too deep. So we've got to be honest. These things are going to take time, especially when you consider that there are new infrastructure shortfalls that we've got in order to address the problem. Firstly, we actually don't have enough dams, Qaanitah. And where we've tried to build dams, it's taken too long and has become too expensive due to corruption. The Duop Dam in Limpopo is one such example. I worked in the mining sector. It took too long to build, and I believe it's still not complete, and it's cost too much money. I think there are two things that need to happen. The first is that, again, we need to do proper spatial planning, first of all, and determine how much water we need and where that investment is going to come from, and build the dams and related infrastructure accordingly, while fixing the existing infrastructure because it is falling apart. Part of that is removing all the corrupt networks that keep people thirsty and starving as a consequence. Secondly, on the issue of load shedding, I think the question is, how do we make sure that South Africans have got access to reliable, continuous, and cheaper renewable energy over time? There's $6.5 billion in terms of the climate change agreement that the ANC still cannot agree who's going to steal how much from it. We can use some of that to put solar panels on every roof in South Africa. That would lower the cost of living and contribute to a cleaner environment.
Mr. Said, the next question is addressed to you specifically. The Zondo Commission found that the ANC was complicit in state capture and unable to looting of government through your policy of cadre deployment, which you told us earlier you want to continue. 97 ANC members were named in the final Zondo report on state capture. Yet, when your party's candidate lists were announced earlier this year, many names of people implicated in state capture like Gwede Mantashe, Zizi Kodwa and David Mahlobo were still on the lists. How can the ANC win the fight against corruption if you refuse to clean your own house first?
Firstly, let me dispel the myth that cadre deployment in and of itself is the problem. I've already spoken to that. As I said, it's around implementation and how people have been trying to abuse it. And we're getting that right. Our list process, compared to previous years and compared to the list process of other political parties in this particular elections, with Kgalema Motlanthe leading the process, has been extremely specific and has focused on integrity and ethics. People have been vetted. Now, let me say The ANC embraces the findings of the Zondo Commission report. But we also understand that we are in a constitutional democracy. As Mr. Zibi pointed out earlier, the law of the country is very, very important. We cannot remove people from a list if they have not been criminally charged. People may be mentioned in a Zondo Commission report. Once, based on their mentioning in a report and findings on them in a report, once there are criminal charges, they'll be asked to step aside. We're the only party who has got that particular policy, a step-aside policy based on a conference resolution, and it has happened. Ace Makashule, where is he today? That's just but one example. So we want to reassure the public that even though there may be people on a list that are mentioned in a Zondo Commission, and we respect the Zondo Commission findings, we will wait until those particular individuals are charged, and our integrity committee of the ANC fully engages on each and every specific case, and then action will be taken. It doesn't mean that if you're on a list, you are necessarily going to automatically just sit in Parliament.
Thank you. Mr. Zibi, you start the responses.
I think the very concept of an integrity commission in the ANC is laughable. But let us take them at face value. I think what we see here in the answer by my colleague here is the level of poor understanding of how fed up with corruption South Africans are. The only solution that is going to get us out of this mess that this criminal syndicate has caused is to vote them out on the 29th of May. There really is no other solutions. We don't need to entertain this vacillation and obfuscation that we're hearing from the ANC today.
Mr. Mashaba?
Well, unfortunately, honestly, with due respect, the ANC treat us like fools. I think for them to subject us to criminals on the list, people clearly fingered in the Zondo report. People that even before the Zondo Commission, billion rands went down the drain. Long before that, we knew of the state capture and the corruption of the ANC. So I think honestly, with due respect, Mr. Said, as ANC treats South Africans with due respect, not to give them criminals to continue looting and destroying our country.
Mr. Steenhuisen?
Well, I want to say this is another example about the great manipulators in the ANC. They want to manipulate the South African people into thinking that they're doing something about corruption and maladministration, when in fact they're doing nothing but foster it, engender it in their particular party. And this is another example of it. Mr. Ramaphosa said he was going to get rid of the corrupt in the ANC. There's 90 of them on the list. He said he was going to take a strong line against corruption. His own deputy president, who sits opposite him in the east wing of the union buildings, as exposed by Carl Cowan, has huge questions to answer. They're all on the list. This is another manipulation, and the South African people must not be fooled again in this election.
Mr. Glabisa?
It is too late for the ruling party to assure people of South Africa that it can deal with the issue of corruption. It's just very late. If you look at the list, my brother says to be in the list doesn't mean you will get in the parliament. Why do you put in a list a person who is corrupt implicated? The Phala Phala saga, they demonstrated that if they have a majority rule, they can throw out the report which should be dealt accordingly. So now corruption needs consequence management. The IFP will put consequence management as a priority to deal with corrupt people.
Mr. Said, they're not buying what you're saying.
I need to respond. Let me firstly indicate that corruption is anti-poor, it's anti-working class. We've got no tolerance for corruption. But let me also say, and people can laugh, yeah. Let me also indicate that we also have to respect the rule of law. You cannot run around and just call people corrupt if you've got no proof of that. I can't run around and say that Mr. Conrad Poole, the former mayor of Drakensberg municipality under the Democratic Alliance, is guilty of being corrupt. He's allegedly corrupt. And because of those alleged corruption allegations, the ANC and members of the DA voted him out in a vote of no confidence, and is now being rewarded with a seat in the Western Cape legislature and a nice place high up on the DA's national list. That is what has happened.
Mr. Steenhuisen, you've been accused of harboring a corrupt. Sorry, your time is up, Mr. Said.
Mr. Said knows full well that these allegations were made, they were tested, and the Speaker tabled the report in Council. Mr. Poole was completely exonerated. There's no charges hanging over his head. They can't say the same for his Speaker in the National Assembly, who President Ramaphosa, the arch manipulator, cosseted in his cabinet for so long. We can't say the same about Mr. Paul Mashatile, who I've laid criminal charges against, Mr. Gwedi Mantashe, who's also facing criminal charges. These are real hardened criminals. He's coming here and talking about lizards when he's got crocodiles on the list of his own party.
Mr. Mashaba?
We're not guilty of anything as yet.
Mr. Mashaba?
Well, I think, you know, the big problem we're facing here in South Africa, according to the ANC list, where they're talking about the rule of law. Tell me, according to Fraser, $4 million were found under mattresses and sofas. With the number one citizen of our country, money coming into our country without going through the normal banking channels. That's where the problem is, and that's really the disrespect that the ANC is actually showing to us as people of South Africa.
So let's move now to party matters. Mr. Steenhuisen, you made it your mission on your election as DA leader last year to unite the opposition in the pursuit of ousting the African National Congress. You've since campaigned against some of these political parties that you were hoping to unite with. You call them popcorn political parties and labeling them political mercenaries for daring to campaign in the Western Cape. Is this not counterproductive to what you're hoping to achieve?
No, we've got the multi-party charter, the 11 signatories to the multi-party charter, and those parties passed the test for South Africa's public, that they have committed to sitting together and working towards building a viable alternative to the ANC and to set in place a new system of government that's going to change the country. And I'm very proud to share the platform today with two of them. These are parties that have signed an agreement so that voters going into the election know where we stand on the issues. We've been releasing joint policies, joint approaches, and we've been doing some joint marketing and events together, showing South Africans that we're working together. But I am right to warn South Africans, and I never said they couldn't campaign in the Western Cape. I questioned the logic of it. Why would you expend resources as an opposition party in trying to unseat the only opposition-controlled province already, when we've got 8 other provinces that are desperate to be liberated from the oppression and corruption of the ANC? So anybody can campaign anywhere. I think I've got a right to ask why you would spend your resources here. That being said, I think the multi-party charter remains the single biggest block outside of the ANC that can bring change. And I question why people don't want to be part of it. But I'm not here today to argue with margins of error and other things. I'm here to deal with Mr. Syed, because that's what we've got to focus on as the opposition, getting his party out of government so that we can start to do the things that we've been speaking about today on this podium.
Mr. Zibi, is your party, how does your party respond to the assertion that you're a popcorn political party?
It's going to be winter soon, Qaanitah, and the informal settlements of the Western Cape are going to be flooded. And people are going to wake up with their shoes floating away from where they live, and they won't know where to stay. What John is proposing here is that they don't deserve to be impatient. They don't deserve to be unhappy. They do not deserve to have a champion that is going to fight for urgency in resolving the issues in their lives.
Mr. Syed, you wanted to come in on the issue of political parties, opposition political
Certainly.
parties?
Firstly, what this indicates is that the Democratic Alliance and its moonshot chaos partners do not have anything to offer to the South African public, because it's all about the ANC. It's all about the ANC. It's not about what value offering you have to improve the lives of South Africans, number one. Number two, it's an utter disrespect for democracy. We as the ANC respect multi-party democracy. This is why we have initiated many programs. We actually encourage, in provinces where we govern, for other political parties to come up, to tell us what are the solutions. We encourage what Rise Mzansi is doing, because even in this debate, they are speaking in a very, very practical manner. We may not agree with everything,
Mr. Syed,
but it's very, very important. It yet again proves that the Democratic Alliance, while it calls itself democratic, is an undemocratic, right-wing alliance wishing to keep the Western Cape as a racist enclave.
I will come back to Mr. Steenhuisen to weigh in, but I just want to go to Mr. Hlabisa, followed then by Mr. Mashaba, on your take on this.
Now, firstly, we must inform the public correctly. There is multi-party charter, not the moonshot thing. because we'll keep on denying the truth, because denialism kills. The multi-party charter is not about the ANC, it is about the people of South Africa, but of course, the ANC has destroyed our country, deserves to be removed from power. The IFP believes in free campaigning for everybody,
Sure.
Smaller parties, independent candidates, because we believe in multi-party democracy.
I would honestly like to really echo Mr. Thabisa's sentiments. The multi-party charter does not really belong to any political party. It belongs to the signatories to our agreement. It's not something that was started by the DA or anyone else. I think for some of us who have worked with the other parties, we initiated this long before the DA announced the formation of the Moonshot Pact. And we're grateful that there is this realignment of all of us work together for people of South Africa to remove this corrupt ANC out of government.
Mr. Steenhuisen,
It's not an anti-ANC pact. It is a pact that's pro-South Africa. And that's why we have policies in the alternative. But if I was a Rise Mzansi supporter, I'd be very worried that the ANC are welcoming you to campaign in the Western Cape, because all you're going to do if you split the opposition vote is end up with the situation you have in Knysna, in Laingsburg, in Beaufort West. You're going to, when the opposition fight with each other, it opens the door for Mr. Sayed's party to come in with this coalition of corruption. And I would like to work with these opposition parties to keep the ANC out and to win more provinces away from them, and that's the goal of the Charter.
Mr. Shaba, you want to come back in before we move on?
I just really want Mr. Steenhuisen to please respect the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. We live in a constitutional democracy.
Sure.
It is up to the voters to really decide which political party must govern them anywhere in the country.
Mr. Zibi, I'll come to you, Mr.
I just want to say that given the torrent of SMSs and emails that DA has been sending out, those have not been about Mr. Sayed's criminal syndicate. Those have been about us. So much for a party that is comfortable and happy that the people of the Western Cape are happy about its governance record. What the DA has got to decide is whether being in government for 15 years, you can still call yourself an opposition. To whom?
Okay.
They are in opposition to the very same electorate that they are afraid is not going to vote for them in this election.
A quick stab at this.
Quick one. I think when we campaign, when we speak out against each other in this manner, let us always bear in mind that for the majority of time in government, whether you're in parliament, whether you're in the legislature, we're not going to be in an election mode. We're going to have to govern. Even when you're sitting on the opposition benches, we're going to have to contribute to policy, to service delivery, to oversight. And citizens want to see that. So let's bear in mind the discourse that we need to create in our country is a constructive one that is geared towards improving the lives of people. So when we campaign, let's bear that in mind. That's the message I want to give to my colleagues and to Mr. Steenhuisen in particular.
Mr. Steenhuisen, do you want to wrap up on this?
Well, I want to say very clearly that I've been clear from the beginning about the risks of what happens when you split the opposition. It's you end up with situations with poor governance. Now, I'd be very worried if I was a political party with the one party that we should be working to get out of office, patting us on the head and praising us. And you know, I think that voters need to understand we've got a party here that supports expropriation without compensation, that supports BEE, and is being praised by the ANC. That seems like ANC-like to me.
Mr. Steenhuisen, to be fair, Mr. Zibi's answer on expropriation without compensation was
clear as mud.
It's different to the ANC.
Was layered. Mr. Glabisa, I want to come back to you about this matter of opposition parties. Your party, the IFP, is growing nationally and in KwaZulu-Natal specifically. That's what the polls are showing us. You could end up in a position where you would be the kingmaker in your home province and in national government. In a scenario where you are offered the premiership of KwaZulu-Natal in exchange for supporting the ANC to form a national government, would you consider such a deal?
No, we will not consider such, because it happened in 1999 when the ANC, when Mr. Mbeki wanted to appoint Princip Telezi as the deputy president, they wanted that to be exchanged with KwaZulu-Natal. We do not believe in betraying the will of the people. We are campaigning to reclaim KwaZulu-Natal, to become the government in KwaZulu-Natal, to lead that province, and we will not betray the voters. Similar, in Gauteng, our attitude is that we must remove the government that has destroyed the economic hub of our country. Whatever votes we will get will add to the removal of such government. At a national level, we are party of the multi-party charter, and we will be encouraging the independents, other political parties, Rise Mzansi, BUSA after elections, that if we are not crossing the line of 50+1, we will get like-minded people, because from where I stand, Rise Mzansi is against what is the ANC standing for. There are so many people who want a change. The feeling in our country is change. To get a change is to remove a political party that has destroyed everything. And I'm confident if the 14 million people who are dormant will stand up and go to the ballot booth to protest there with their vote, definitely we will have an alternative government.
Mr. Zibi, your party, Rise Mzansi, has refused to join the multi-party charter formed. I was going to say formed by Mr. Steenhuisen, but we agree that it's not formed by Mr. Steenhuisen, to bring the opposition together to oppose the ANC. If the MPC manages to almost reach that 50% mark, would you consider joining them to form a national government, or would you consider working with the ANC?
So, Qaanitah, one of the things that defines Rise Mzansi is maturity and not engaging in this kind of hysterics that we see. We are in an election season right now. We all have to fight to maximize our vote, and after the election, we need to grow the dam up and prevent the kind of chaos that we see where some of these parties are governing in some of the metros up north that are close to collapse. We are clear about two things. The country is in this crisis fundamentally because of the ANC. If the South African people decide to deny the ANC the majority, they must not even look in our direction for us to resuscitate them.
What does that mean? You will not work with the ANC?
Have decided, no, let me finish. I want to get a few seconds more. Because the people would have decided that they do not want the ANC in government anymore. And in that context, our first choice is to make best endeavors to try and create a minority government with other opposition parties that are currently here. One is governing in the Western Cape, although they deny it, but we will work with them in order to form a minority, government, because this country cannot move on from the construction mafias and the criminal and other syndicates that control governments if we retain the ANC in power, because a fundamental quid pro quo is that people like Cyril Ramaphosa and Paul Mashatile and Gwede Mantashe must escape criminal accountability in order for you to get into a coalition with them, and that's a non-negotiable for us.
So Rise Mzansi will not work with the ANC?
No, we'll not work with the ANC at all.
Mr. Mashaba, I want to stay on this theme of coalitions, because looking at all the polls from your own parties and also from independent polling houses, it does seem that we are headed for a coalition future. You and ActionSA have stated unequivocally that you would not work with the ANC. But again, I want to sketch a scenario to you where the only options, say after 29 May, we land in the scenario where the only options to form a national government is either an ANC-EFF coalition or some form of ANC-MPC coalition or minority government that would include ActionSA. Would you still refuse to cooperate with the ANC, and some would say try and save the country?
Well, I think Adriaan asked me this question in 300 years' time, whether I could work with the ANC or not. I've made this really very clear that ANC must wait for my call in 300 years' time, whether we would consider working with them. And only 2.5 years has gone by, so we've still got 297 years before we can even consider working with the ANC. Let me just paint you a practical scenario. Let's say we are accepted to work with the ANC in national government. Second sitting of Parliament and opposition present a report on Zondo Commission. Now tell me, what must ActionSA do? Must we now vote to protect the ANC? I mean, you can imagine, really working with the ANC is just too risky. This is a criminal enterprise that we will never really touch it. I've always said to South Africans, I was born and raised in poverty and avoided to be a criminal at that age. Now you can imagine at my age and financial status, I must join a criminal enterprise. It's not going to happen. In 300 years' time, I might consider it.
I hear you, Mr. Mashaba, but Mr. Steenhuisen, your colleague in the MPC, have spoken about this doomsday scenario where the ANC, the EFF, and maybe one or two other parties get into the union buildings. Would you, in that scenario, still remain rather in opposition?
We'd rather, as ActionSA, rather remain in opposition than be associated with a criminal enterprise.
Mr. Steenhuisen, do you want to weigh in on this issue?
Yeah, sure. I'm saying very clear. I think that the best solution for South Africa to get out of this terrible low growth, high debt, high unemployment, corruption environment is to ensure that we get a new government in place after the election. And that's why I've signed agreement with Mr. Mashaba and Mr. Schlabisa, and that we're working with 8 other colleagues to be able to get this over the line. And that is certainly my focus in the next 40 days, is to get us over the line with 51%, because you're not going to change the country's problems by keeping the same people who got us into the mess around that table in the union buildings.
Mr. Syed, a lot has been said about the possibility of a coalition, and I think it's a reality. I think you can all understandably will campaign on the ticket that you will win the election clear, but the polls are clear. Any party is going to struggle to get over that 50% line. Is the ANC interested in forming a coalition government after this election, and are there specific parties that you would prefer to form a coalition with?
Let me firstly indicate, and as you've correctly put it, election is a democratic process. Citizens have a right to vote for which party they want to vote for based on the value offering of those political parties. Political parties, and especially the ANC, we're a 112-year-old organization supported by the majority of South Africans. We contest elections to get a 50% plus one majority. Polls can say one thing, but the reality on the ground for us indicates that we are taking a 50% plus one majority. We are not entertaining at this moment in time coalition discussions. However, we also are mature and we are realistic. So we will work with political formations, as we are doing now, with whom we can have a common vision with. We're not going to get into specifics because, as I said, our focus is on ensuring that we come back with a strengthened mandate to govern South Africa and to do better than what we are doing now.
But specifics matter in coalition, and the ANC is in coalition with the EFF as we speak. Would you prefer to continue that relationship on a national level?
That's a coalition at the local government level after local government elections. We are approaching a general election, national and provincial election. We'll get into that. Ask us those questions after the results are out.
You won't have time. It's 2 weeks. There's a 2-week period between election results and when a government needs to be formed. And the ANC will have to then go cap in hand to political parties if your majority is reduced.
You see, Qaanitah, the thing here is we need to be very careful. And there's an agenda out there. There's a global agenda to ensure that the African National Congress is unseated, a Western agenda. Ever since we've gone to the ICJ to take up the Palestinian issue and try Israel for genocide, a genocide which Mr. Steenhuisen believes is one man's freedom fight, there's now an agenda to ensure that either we go into coalition so that we are diluted and the fight cannot continue, or we have this moon pact which is clearly not cohesive, given what has been said here. We're not going to play into that. We are focused on ensuring that we govern, and I think we will govern this country. We are not going to go now into coalition discussions.
Mr. Schlabisa, is there some agenda to unseat the ANC?
The agenda to remove the ANC is the agenda of the people of South Africa. If you look at the results of 2019, the ANC got 10 million votes. In 2021, they got 5 million votes. Definitely, they are going to get less in 2024. This is a mission driven by people of South Africa whose dreams have been destroyed by the ruling party. The aspirations of our youth are at a standstill.
Mr. Mashaba, do you want to come in?
Well, I think it's really very strange for the ANC to actually think that there's an international plan to unseat the ANC.
Sure.
ANC is going to be unseated by people of South Africa in a democratic manner. They've already started in the last elections. We can see throughout the country that the ANC is losing power, and they are going to lose power come the 29th of May 2024. And there's no international agenda involved. People of South Africa have had enough of the ANC government.
We've now reached the end of the first leaders' debate. I would now like to give each candidate the opportunity to make a closing statement of 1 minute each. We'll start with Mr. Zibi and move on.
Thanks, Qaanitah. So this election is a choice between the old and the new, between despair and hope, and between arrogance and humility, between callousness and empathy, between division and unity. And whether we paper over the cracks of a divided past and present, or we strive for an authentic non-racial unity in South Africa. We say we need new leaders who are capable, empathetic to the most vulnerable, unburdened by old divisions, but clear in their vision of the South Africa we all deserve. And Rise Mzansi's vision is clear and compelling, and that is a society that is safe, prosperous, equal, and united within one generation. We represent a break from the current politics of party political power plays by showing a commitment to real people's power, to justice, to solidarity, and integrity. It is time for new leaders, and Rise Mzansi presents that proposition.
Mr. Mashaba?
You know, for us as ActionSA, we really want to make an appeal to South African people who ANC was under the illusion and impression that South Africans are going to be blind and ignorant. Fortunately enough, parties like ActionSA emerged and determined to wake South Africans up to the reality of this corrupt, unpatriotic government. And this is going to be your chance to exercise your democratic right to bring about change in this country. Change is not going to be brought by the Americans or the Russians. Change in this country is going to be brought by South Africans going out there to go and vote. The 27.7 million South Africans come out and demonstrate that you can really get yourself out of this bondage. Just one day go out, because your vote on that particular day will actually determine whether South Africa becomes a prosperous nation or we become another failed African state. And I believe strongly that South Africans are going to come out triumphant on the 29th of May.
Mr. Steenhuisen?
Yeah, I want to speak directly to the South African people and say particularly to the mother who's sitting at home wondering how this evening she's going to put food on the table for her starving children. I want to speak directly to the father or husband who sat without a job for the last 5 years because the government has destroyed the factories and industries where you were employed. I want to speak directly to the public health care patient who's sitting tonight watching this, anxious that they're going to get the treatment they need to make them better. I want to speak to the young person, the young graduate, who has to stand at a traffic light every day with their degree certificate and their gown, begging people for a job. I've got a clear message for each and every one of you as a citizen, that help is on the way. And that help is going to come on the 29th of May when we elect a new government. It is very simple in this election. There is a clear binary that is developed. You can either have the multi-party charter of parties with a plan to work together to liberate you from the yoke of suffering and oppression from the ANC, or you can have the doomsday coalition. Vote for your hopes, not for your fears.
The people of South Africa must vote the IFP because the IFP will do things differently. We do not make empty promises. The promises we make is what we will keep. Yes. The IFP is a political party of integrity, accountability, honesty. We believe in the introduction of consequence management. People who are not performing should be removed from the position they occupy so that whoever benefits from the resources as an employee must give the best to our people. Our top priorities we will create jobs. We will end load shedding. We will end crime in our community. We will focus on corruption as the enemy of our people. Health and education will be raised to quality level to all, especially previously disadvantaged people.
Finally, Mr. Syed.
Thank you very much. As the Parliament of the People of the Republic of South Africa, known as the African National Congress, we are calling upon our people to come out in numbers and express confidence as you have been doing in the African National Congress. We are acutely aware of the mistakes that have been made. But now is the time, as we have proven since the new leadership has come into place in the ANC, we are on the path of renewal. Part of that renewal has also been to infuse our lists for legislatures and parliament with the relevant mix, generational mix of professional expertise, activism. We are saying, let us continue taking on the legacy of apartheid as we have been doing with improvements, but also our fight for humanity and justice in this country, notwithstanding the natural shortcomings that will be there, which we are always open to improving because we promote a multi-party democracy, is also recognized globally, and we are doing this as well for the people suffering in Palestine, for the people suffering globally. Please always maintain that, yes, while we are not saying that we are dependent on global forces, let us always maintain that these elections happen within a global context of a struggle between truth and a struggle between falsehood.
Thank you, Mr. Syed. Well, there you have it, folks. That's a wrap of the first inaugural News24 Leaders Debate. I would like to thank all our participants for participating in this open democratic process. To all our viewers, we hope that this debate has helped you make up your view on who to vote for on the 29th of May. Remember, it's up to you to decide who will govern South Africa for the next 5 years. Make an informed choice, and remember, the most important thing is just to vote. Until next time, goodbye.